Trump thinks that he can get away with this. Again, maybe the Israelis have been telling him, and I'm sure they have been, that we just completely gutted the air defense of Iran. They're naked. You can just go fly over and drop your 30,000-pound bunker buster bombs. And that's apparently what they prepared. These bombs are so huge that they really could destroy some of these facilities that are deep underground, or potentially could. So he might be thinking that, this is something that he can pull off, and we'll see. Again, the stories about the obliteration of Iran's air defense, I just don't believe. I can't know for sure, but I'm very skeptical of that. I think that they have actually, good air defense, and it's only going to get better with Russian support. And again, it's just that this is something completely different from Lebanon or Gaza, where the Israelis just rule the sky and they can drop their bombs and fire their missiles at will. They can't do that in Iran, and it's going to be a completely different. It's going to be just a completely different situation for the Americans and the Israelis, because it'd probably be a joint operation if they really do try to fly into Iranian airspace and attack Iranian facilities. We may see planes go down, and then what happens? Can Trump just accept that, or is he going to double down? It's a very dangerous situation. Now, just maybe, Iran will make some kind of face-saving gesture, because again, they don't want this war, but at the same time, they have been. They do have their national pride and the concerns about their own sovereignty, and they have been burned again and again in the past. So far, the position of the Iranian government is that we're not dealing with you. Maybe they'll change. Maybe they'll do a little something, just because maybe Trump just wants to have something to show, look what I did. He's not going to get a real agreement out of them, but maybe he can get a little something else, which is the Iranians are willing to concede just to avoid a war. But they may not be willing to do it. They may just decide, look, we're just gonna have to bite the bullet this time. If we're constantly under these threats. Maybe we just have to meet them head on this time, and that's a very, very dangerous situation that we're looking at.
Do you think that Trump, people like Pete Hegseth, really believe that Iran is naked, that in this one attack from Israel, that Israel completely wiped out all their air defenses and they're completely open and naked? Because we saw, after this attack, we saw footage from Iran of their air defense systems shooting everything down. It looked like fireworks in the sky. You can find it, I'm sure, on X. Mm-hmm. And you can see that I haven't seen a single impact. I haven't seen footage of a single impact from that so-called devastating attack from Israel. From my understanding, they didn't even penetrate Iranian airspace because they were getting locked on by the air defense systems. They want, 50 kilometers of the border fired and turned tail. And where's the evidence that their air defenses have been wiped out? How can they be so confident? Do they think they actually believe that Iran is so naked?
Yeah, well, I haven't seen the evidence. And normally, again, if the Israelis achieve something notable, they're not shy about producing the evidence. They release satellite photos, for example, and we just haven't seen them. So I'm highly skeptical. I don't think they did anything. They maybe damaged a radar facility or something like that. Now, sometimes it's just like but I'm sure at the same time the Israelis are working on the Americans to try to convince them, maybe even supplying them with fabricated evidence. They're certainly not above doing that. And if you have, if your target audience, which is to say the U.S. defense establishment led by Pete Hegseth has a predisposition, to go to war and to believe the Israelis, maybe they can be fooled, or, is maybe the administration wants to be fooled on this because they really are eager to to launch this war. And then there's something else going on. I think, like the victories, we have to call them victories of against both Syria and Lebanon. The very devastating decapitation strikes on Lebanon. Perhaps has produced a certain amount of hubris on the Israeli and American side. It's like, yeah, we can just wipe them out. We did this. Of course, Iran is not comparable to Lebanon. Again, as we say, Iran actually has control over their own airspace in a way that Lebanon doesn't. And then Iran is, though there are fracture points, there are guerrilla groups, and obviously the Israelis succeeded in penetrating Iranian society to some extent. It's nothing like Lebanon, where there is a huge Western intelligence and Israeli intelligence presence. So, I just don't think you can make the comparison, but there had given them a false sense of invincibility, given Israel and the U.S. a false sense of invincibility. And then, there was this sudden collapse in Syria, and maybe they're thinking, well, look, like people said that this could never happen. It did. So we can just, why can't we do this in Iran too? A decapitation strike and the whole country will fall apart. It's just maybe they believe their own propaganda, that it's just that people are all waiting to rise up and the instant that the leadership is taken out, the whole society will, fall apart, or, we'll see something like a repeat of Syria. But again, well,
is that thunder?
That's thunder. Yes, not artillery. Okay. It's thunder. There's there are, okay, well, Iran again is not comparable to Syria. It's one thing I probably should have paid more attention to this, but the Syrian economy was almost completely destroyed. It's just a fraction of what it used to be prior to the start of the civil war in 2011. And again, the Americans seized the wheat fields, seized the oil producing region of Syria, and it imposed these very severe sanctions. And it was, the Syrian economy was something like 25% of what it was before. Now, Iran, they suffered because of these sanctions, but they still control all their own territory. They're a much larger country, and they are now enjoying, growing trade relations with many countries in the world, important countries like Russia and China and India and so on and so forth. And so it's just not comparable. But it just may be that these people are going into it. That's one of the dangers. It's just like if you enjoy a string of successes, a leader can just have a sense of his own invincibility. And he can remember, these guys told me that, hey, you shouldn't do this. This is dangerous or whatever. And I did it, and I was proved to be right. So they stop listening sometimes to the, as they see it, the naggers, or the, I think there is a real danger that the U.S. might go ahead and do this with Israel. I think there is a real danger of it. It's more than just something on the order of 50% anyway. I'm really worried about this.
Yeah, me too. Just the language that Trump is using, saying, there will be a bombing and it'll be bombing the likes which they have never seen before. You wouldn't use that rhetoric if you were aware of Iran's capabilities. I think we've completely underestimated Iran, which I find extraordinary after they have made multiple demonstrations of their capabilities. Talked about the Soleimani attack. We've seen what they did in Tel Aviv, in Israel, on two attacks that they carried out. We know that they have hypersonic missiles. We know that they are in a defense contract with Russia. We know that they can punch back. But if you know that, why would you say something like this? Yeah. We would never say something like this to the Russians,
right?
At least I don't think so.
Well, the truth is, again, that we haven't. There's been talk about striking Iran for better than 20 years. And we have always, and sometimes it seems like we get close to doing it. There's a real effort, uh, uh, um, within the different administrations, or serious consideration is given to the attack. So we've gotten close to this in the past. And the most recent, of course, was actually under Biden. Apparently, the Biden administration was very carefully considering an attack on Iran, a joint Israeli attack on Iranian nuclear facilities, and then they decided against it. Now, I think they decided against it, and the reason that we've always pulled back is there is an understanding. There are realists, and honest analysts that's within the intelligence agencies and within the Pentagon. And they have always won out in the past, so it's just like though clearly George W. Bush wanted to, I think Anthony Blinken wanted to, but in the end, they lost the argument, because the other side, or the realists, could say, look, if you go down this road, there's a very, very high chance that we're going to have these catastrophic, consequences. It's not going to be a good look. It's going to be a real mess. So let's not do this. Now, I'm sure that those same people are saying the same thing, to Trump's people. But for the reasons that I just laid out, there's a chance that Trump's people are ignoring them.
That's scary. You've told me that Iran has been preparing for a war with America for decades. This is something that they've been getting ready for. Can you tell me how ready Iran is for a war with the United States?
Yeah, well, I don't know the details. We've seen actually video footage released by Iran of tunnels, very large tunnels underground, that are part of these underground missile facilities. And so they do have, all kinds of installations underground. And again, Iran is a large country, and much of it is very mountainous. So there are some of these facilities are deep within mountains, and they've had time to carve out these underground facilities. And they have studied the U.S. and have made strategic choices about how they're going to defend themselves and respond. They know that they don't have an air force, or will ever have an air force that can really, counter the U.S. But they have worked on the new technologies, which we found to be, drone technology and missile technology, hypersonic missiles, that kind of thing. And we don't know how many of these missiles they have, but there's no question that they have a considerable number, and they've demonstrated that these are very precise. Again, the U.S. has a lot of assets in the region that would be very vulnerable to missile attacks and drone attacks. So, yeah, they can, and then they have significant air defense. I'm sure there are holes in it. It's a very large country. It's probably not as good as the Russian air defense. The Russian air defense is supposed to be the best in the world. And, even though it's the best in the world, occasionally something gets through, because it's a huge country, and no air defense, no matter how good it is 100%. So I think inevitably some things would get through and do some real damage to Iran, but it wouldn't be on the scale that, would cause them to surrender or anything close to that. And they would be able to retaliate in a, in very significant, potentially devastating fashion.
Is the United States, is our ability to inflict damage on Iran primarily through our Air Force? Is that what it would be?
Yeah, I think it would mainly be air-launched and ship-launched missiles.
Okay, let's say we have planes, and we have these stealth bombers. They're flying over Iran to bomb Tehran or bomb some nuclear facility deep in the mountains. What is the likelihood of these planes being shot down?
Well, I think there's a significant likelihood. The stealth technology has been shown to be far less imperfect. These planes are not invisible. They have a reduced profile on a radar system, but they can be detected. So I think it's quite likely that the let's say stealth bombers would be identified, detected as they cross into Iranian airspace or approach it. I mean, that's a story that we heard actually, that during the most recent attack by the Israelis, is that their planes were approaching Iran, and that but then maybe this is just a false report, nothing more than a rumor, but this comes from Alistair Crook, who has some very good sources in the Middle East, including in Israel. And he was told that, as these planes approached Iran, they became aware that the Iranians had detected them. They had locked onto them. And, rather than risk being shot down, they turned around before crossing into Iranian airspace.
So then what they do is they go back and lie to the United States, saying, we got rid of all of their air defense systems. Now you guys go and do it. We already took care of it, and we'll be the ones that get shot down. It's crazy. I mean, also, I
suspect that's what's going on. I can't know for sure, but I suspect that's what's going on.
Right. I mean, but we saw that footage of Iran's air defenses prior, and they knocked everything down. And I imagine shooting down a cruise missile or a ballistic missile is much more difficult than shooting down a plane, which is slower moving and much larger. So the idea that they won't be able to shoot down these planes, I think, is ludicrous. That we could just fly over and bomb them with impunity is insane. I wouldn't be surprised if Iran shoots down all of these. And then on top of that, where are these planes being launched from? Oh, from USS Harry Truman or Diego Garcia? Well, Iran can just hit your aircraft carrier and hit that Diego Garcia base. And where are these planes going to even come back to if they even did make it to their target? It's like, I just feel like if I'm able to think about this, surely somebody in the Trump administration could think about this too. You have all these assets scattered throughout the Middle East that have very poor air defense or incapable air defense of stopping what the Iranians have. So it's just, we do this, all hell's going to break loose. We're just going to get humiliated throughout the Middle East. We will be blown out of the Middle East if we do this. Do you think so? I know you say it could be. I don't even think that we can do that much because it's just like you said. Okay, Navy and air, and Iran's ready for this. This isn't Gaza. This isn't Lebanon. This isn't Syria. This is something completely different.
Yeah. I want to, first of all, just confirm what you said about the aircraft. Aircraft are much more vulnerable. That's a change. A couple decades ago, the aircraft had the edge. There were anti-air missiles. Of course, they've been around for many decades. But let's say an F-16 or whatever, a top-notch fighter jet could evade these. It would be scary. It would rely on some real skill on the part of the pilot, but they could evade them. And that's just not true anymore. That's what I've heard. It's just like you really can't evade these now. You can take every evasive, maneuver in the book, but it's gonna hit you, and bring your aircraft down. And we can see that actually in the Ukraine war, because the Russians have a very formidable air force, but they rarely fly over Ukrainian-held territory. They, they used to be that they stayed well back. Now they're getting closer just because Ukrainian air defenses have been so degraded, so they can get closer to the front line. But they still don't, I think with very rare exceptions, they don't fly over Ukrainian-held territories. They still have air defense. And, it's not what it was before, but it only takes one missile to bring down one of these planes. And, it's very revealing. I mean, that's just the nature of warfare these days. So, you're living in the past, right? You could, during the Persian Gulf War, the first Iraq War, yeah, we could fly over these territories and just unleash, huge numbers of bombs and devastate these countries before we moved in on the ground. And, that's the old war. That's not the new war that we're in, the new warfare that exists at the present time.
Right. I mean, just you saying that Russia still does not fly over Ukrainian territory with their aircraft is very illuminating. Russia has been pummeling Ukraine for 3 years, targeting their air defense systems, and we see it. We see videos of Patriot systems getting blown up to pieces. And despite 3 years of systematically targeting and destroying, Ukrainian air defenses and defense capabilities, they still haven't destroyed all of it. So the idea that in one magical attack that Israel pulled off, where there's no evidence of any strikes, that we did it in one go, despite Russia using hypersonic missiles that cannot be shot down to take these things, using zircons and whatever they have, and it's a process. We see that it's a grind. You can't just flip a switch and then it's over. So the idea that Iran is naked is so absurd, in my opinion. But I see it touted again and again. When I go on X, I see people say, "Yeah, they're going to find out. They don't have any air defense left." I see it stated by so many people, and it's insane to think that if you just think about the things we've said,
right. Yeah, no, you're right. It's been 3 years of devastating missile strikes on Ukraine. And their air defense has been seriously degraded. Their energy infrastructure has been seriously degraded. It's just a fraction of what it used to be. But it took 3 years. And Ukraine is roughly the size and population of Iran.
Not population. Iran's like twice the population.
Okay, right. I was just going to say, exactly. So, and in fact, often we hear, and this is actually another mistake that Witkoff said, that Ukraine has a population of 40 million. That was never correct. Because first of all, the Donbass and whatever is not, you can't take those people and put them in on the Ukrainian side. They're clearly on the Russian side. They're actually somewhere down to like 20 million now because of the territory they've lost, but also because of all the people that have fled. So we're talking about 20 million people. That's one reason why, this is kind of an aside, but just why, in spite of all the damage done to the energy infrastructure, it's still more or less functioning in a lot of places. The lights are on most hours of the day. So many people have left. They don't have the same demand, that they had before. And it was, they had also redundant systems before. But that's something else. Yeah, so we're talking about 20 million versus 80 million, something like that for Ukraine. And again, this is a place that's prepared for a long time for it. You're going to do it in 1 or 2 strikes. No way. Yeah, again, 3 years of just constant pounding by the Russians. And we've seen real damage, but they're still standing. So, so the whole thing is just kind of completely fanciful.
It's insanity. And also Russia is just, right there on the border of Ukraine. This is existential for them. Do you think that we're going to be able to build up a huge presence and base right there next to Iran to have continued operations?
Yeah, well, of course we do have some bases very close to them. Those are the Persian Gulf.
Obliterated.
Yeah, but that's right. But that cuts 2 ways. They're very close to Iran, and Iran, if they find themselves in an existential struggle, they'll take out those bases. They're they're within range of virtually all their missiles. That's a really short trip across the Gulf there.
But despite everything we've said, you think that this might actually happen. And if this happens, America is going to suffer such a humiliating defeat. Is it possible that in any way that the U.S. could be successful in this endeavor? I just don't.
Well, nothing's impossible. Maybe, let's just say they have a successful decapitation strike. Some of these missiles, or even, a bomber gets through and just takes out a good portion of the Iranian leadership. And maybe, Iranian society is more fragile than we assumed. I think that's all very unlikely. I'm sure that the Iranians are preparing for this, and Iran has held together for a long time under, much greater stresses, like the Iran-Iraq War. That was, that led to the death of from anywhere from 200,000 to 500,000 Iranians, and a lot of it through chemical weapons, and Iran held together, and they've held together, under years and years of sanctions. And Iran is now, in a lot of ways, is starting to turn the corner. They're coming in from the cold. They're developing these new relationships. And so I think it's really a pipe dream. You can never say anything's impossible, but it's virtually impossible that it's going to be successful.
And I just can't believe we're even considering it. And I mean, do you think it's likely? I mean, Trump saying this, I feel like he has to back it up, right? Like he said, he doesn't want to appear to be weak.
Yeah.
Do you think he would? You really think that this might happen? Do you think like a 50-50 chance?
I just, for all the reasons I've given. And, again, we've come close to the abyss before and pulled back. And so that may happen again. Trump has made threats that he hasn't carried through on. Yet on the other hand, we're talking about Gaza. Like he said, all hell, they'll be hell to pay if they don't turn over all the hostages, by Saturday. And of course that didn't happen, and there wasn't hell to pay. But hey, we're just looking a couple months later, hell has, that there is hell to pay. So yeah, I don't know. I have no confidence in it not happening. Let's put it that way. I'm not, we're really on a knife's edge here.
We have this coming down, and a potential large Russian offensive maybe happening around the same time, in 1 to 2 months from now. It's
right. Well, well, that's another thing too. It's that you have to look at the kind of the interplay between Russia, the Ukraine war, and Iran, because Russia and Iran are close allies, and obviously in a full-scale attack on Iran is going to really put the Russian-American relationship under a lot of strain. We have seen some improvement, but that's going to be put at risk if this happens. And just on the Russian side, most certainly, you're attacking our close friend here, our partner, and we're going to support them, and that may end up angering Trump, especially if his attack fails, and maybe it will fail catastrophically, and he'll be tempted to blame the Russians for it. It becomes it's we're looking at a minefield in front of us. There are a lot of things that could go very, very wrong. You can hope, and I that again at the last second that Trump's better nature and the realists will win out and will pull back from the edge, and it won't happen. I mean, that's certainly possible, but again, I just wouldn't put a whole lot of money on that.